that, Frank. Try
Yeah.
that, and then.
Okay. All right.
All right, I'll get started here this morning. I know, obviously, time is precious for all of us. Coming off of a long weekend, hopefully a great weekend for many of you. Um, Hopefully, I don't need to reintroduce myself, but I will. Scott Dolch, President and CEO of the Connecticut Restaurant Association. Appreciate the group that's on so far. Obviously, we're recording this. A lot of members that want to try to catch this afterwards. As you guys know, we typically try to have a webinar post session. But as I continue to talk to my team and the staff about ways to continue to interact with our members, this is hopefully going to be the first of many. Um, Obviously, not specific to legislative. There we go, Frank. See you now.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we got you. So what we'll try to do today is I brought some restaurant owner operators onto our call to really allow them to kind of hopefully talk about what they're seeing, where they are, give a quick update. I think there's some value to all of you on, and ask some questions. Either raise a hand, and we don't have a huge group on this morning, Q&A and stuff like that. But we're just trying to figure out the best way to continue to use technology to our advantage with our members, to kind of give you guys a lay of the land. But I guess the first kind of two parts of this before I turn this over to Doug and Frank, and actually Emily Mangrone, hopefully will get a chance to join us. I know she's been running around. I wanted to first give an update, and then I'll have Nicole give a legislative quick update, and then hopefully the last like 35 minutes or so will allow Doug, Frank, myself just to kind of, I'll try to moderate some questions. Hopefully Emily can jump on and talk about legislative issues, but also talk about what they're seeing in their business. So I'm going to start with just a quick share of screen, if this will work, because Katie's probably, let's see. Katie's going to get mad, but I'm using the full screen. All right, can everybody see that? Nick? The only face I see. Good. Okay. All right. Couple quick slides just to give you guys a sense of what's been going on in the CRA. I don't have a whole lot of slides on here from, the team is working extremely hard on exclusive savings programs, ServSafe classes, our foundation. We could be on this call for an hour just to give you guys a sense of how hard the team is working on so many things with that. But I just want to give you guys a sense of kind of event sides and what's going on as we lead forward. But any questions you have for us and our team, you know how to get a hold of us. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Obviously here to help and be that resource for you. So I don't need to stay on this slide very long. You guys know who is here, and I'll give them full formal introductions in a second. Just a couple, I want to thank the people that are on the call and so many others that hopefully will watch us later on. We had an unbelievable CRA night at the Capitol. Now it's been almost a little over a month just about now of we had an event at the Capitol, our second really year post-COVID, where we had over 30 plus restaurants at the first floor of the Capitol, kind of the last week of session, really showcasing and showing off our industry to all the legislators in the building, how important it is for us to continue to highlight our industry, especially when you get into the last week of session. As Nicole, this is one of the favorite events of the year, if not the favorite event of the year of our legislators. Obviously, the food was phenomenal, but realistically, it's great conversations, great opportunity to just continue to drive home how important our industry is in the state and making sure some of the bad bills don't pass, but also to continue to talk to them about other ways to help the industry moving forward. So just want to start there and thank you guys. Great photos of the event, so many more as well. We look forward to continuing this event year after year. We always try to do it the last week of session. So next year it'll probably be more early June because it'll be a little bit longer session. Public Affairs Conference, I just wanted to highlight, as you guys know, we don't just work on a state level and a local level, we work on a federal level as well. Every year, I take board members, anyone that has an interest in wanting to go down to DC. We had a great crew with us that went down, obviously, with as you see in some of the photos, Tim Adams and Phil Barnett, who are on our board, and Keith Bollier, our chairman. But we also had Dee from Mulberry Street, Danita, and Brian from Wooden Tap, as well as Luke Fenner from Elm, made the trip this year for the first time for the three of them. I got a chance to meet with all of our delegates, talk about a lot of the issues federally, whether that's immigration challenges. We talked a little bit about some of the crime things that are happening. Talked about junk fees, tip credit, kind of the gauntlet of conversations, and just trying to educate each of our delegates on the importance of our industry back in Connecticut. And we'll look to do that again next year. But thank you to those that made the trip. Looking forward to continue to grow that event year after year. It's such a great opportunity and great experience for a lot of our members to spend time not only with our delegates, but with each other as well. Just in case you didn't see it, had a lot of fun partnering with Colin Kaplan and Mary Corsi and their team of taking an idea on the road down to DC and declaring New Haven as the pizza capital of the United States. Such a great trip. We had over 110 people on a chartered flight from Avello out of New Haven down to the steps of DC to declare that. A lot of fun that we had. Got a lot of national media. But again, I think everyone knows we really the growth of pizza around the state, but obviously New Haven is the birthplace, and just such a fun event, continuing to try to what we can do to kind of highlight the culinary scene in Connecticut. Golf Classic. All right, so our two kind of upcoming events. Golf is completely sold out, 260 golfers. Thank you to all those that are participating. There's still opportunities for you to be a part of the event. If you'd like to, you see our slate of our 4 chefs for our chef farm dinner with Macarena, Damon, David, and Johan. So excited to have that. They'll be working with our ProStart students. So you can still buy dinner tickets, tea signs, non-golfing sponsorships. You can go to ctrestaurant.org/golf. We've already have just an incredible event as we always do, but looking forward to making 2024 the biggest it can be. To all the proceeds either support our association, but also our silent auction. I don't even have it on here, but if you want to donate to the raffle and silent auction, all proceeds of that go to our foundation. So looking forward to a great event the end of June. Hope you guys can make it out. Last event, we have a board meeting next week down in New Canaan at Elm. And following the board meeting, if you guys are in the area and want to participate, we're doing a reception from 4 to 6, hosted by Luke Venner and the team at Elm. So we'll have our board, but any restaurateurs in the area that want to stop in and network with our board members, with ourselves, the CRA, hope you can make it out. Any interest in that, please just reach out to our team and we will provide you all the details. And we look forward to seeing many of you down in New Canaan. All right, I'm going to turn this over quickly for Nicole to give a quick update. You guys have seen the emails, but as you guys know, just really a very successful session. I know if someone asked, well, what bills did you get passed? That's always the fun. I wish we could get more positive bills passed, but as far as the negative bills, the lack of those passing in a short session with the makeup of the legislature that we have, I definitely commend and applaud Nicole. So Nicole Griffin works for Powers, Griffin and Hill. She's our contract lobbyist. She spends countless hours at the Capitol advocating on your behalf, on our industry's behalf. And I just wanted to have her give a quick update today of kind of what some of those bills were, what actually happened. Obviously, nothing ever really goes away in Connecticut, but any questions that you have. So Nick, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Scott. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
I'd like to hear when Scott says he wants to see more bills pass. I think I take a little bit different of a view on this. And I think I've heard from especially restaurant owners for years, just tell the legislature to leave us alone and pass nothing. Tim Adams is famous for saying that, just leave us alone and pass nothing. And so, then being out of session is always good for business owners in Connecticut. And so this year was a short legislative session. It began in February, ended the first week of May. and it's a non-budget year for the legislature. We work on a 2-year budget in Connecticut, and so when they reconvene again after Election Day in January of 2025, it'll be a long session, and so they'll meet from January to June, and they'll pass a new budget. And so the entire legislature is up for election or re-election this year. So that's all of the state Senate and state House will be out running or retiring, and there'll be new folks running. So for those of you not involved in your local races, it's a good time to pay attention and see who's running for re-election, or what new people are out there looking to become your new state representative or state senator. So Scott's got a list up there of some bills that we were following this year. I made a list myself too of kind of the did not pass and the did pass lists. And so I'm going to go through a different order than he has it up there. A bill that's been around for years on that list is the predictive scheduling bill, which would require employers to post employee schedules up to 2 weeks in advance of that schedule. And if you change it, you'd be penalized. There's been different iterations of that bill. I think that bill's time has kind of come and gone. There was a few years ago that it was close to passing, and it hasn't come close again. I think we'll see it continue to be introduced, and unless someone really takes it on as their cause, we're hoping that it still just comes out of the Labor Committee and then doesn't see the light of day on the House or Senate floor. There's a bill that would have banned non-compete agreements. That bill has been kind of a perennial favorite of some folks. It also did not pass this year. I expect to see that come back again next year. There is a bill it was called Senate Bill 3, and in the state Senate in Connecticut, any bill that gets a low number, Senate bills usually 1 through 9, mean that they're a high priority of the Senate leadership. Senate Bill 3 had to do with fee disclosures. And why we were concerned about that bill is because it would have required disclosure of certain fees for all businesses, and for restaurants, we were concerned about disclosing fees. For example, I'll use Doug as an example. If you are a wedding venue or an event venue, you would have to make sure all fees were disclosed in advertising. And so we were concerned that if you have a website, and you weren't disclosing every fee for an event on that website, you could be in violation of this law. We felt it was also very challenging for the state to regulate this, and it would be challenging for the restaurant industry to comply with it. It did not pass. It is a priority of the Senate Majority Leader. We don't know what version of it will come back next year, but we do expect something to be back next year. The blood alcohol level, that bill was around for the second year in a row. As many of you are probably aware, the legal limit for drinking and driving is 0.08 in Connecticut. This legislation would have made it 0.05. There's only one other state in the country that has a similar law, and that's Utah. So there is a state senator who is very passionate about this, and she would like Connecticut to be the second state to do that. She has the support of the State Department of Transportation, who's also been pushing this legislation. And of course, there are other folks that support it. The group MAD has been at the Capitol the past couple of years, also pushing this legislation. I think it's a little bit about education and a little bit about trying to pass the law. The CRA has taken a behind the scenes approach to this bill rather than being out front on it, saying, we certainly agree that education is the way to go, but we're not looking to support a measure that would reduce the blood alcohol level to 0.05 at this point in time. The next bill on the list is the tip credit. This has been a bill that has been out there for years in a different iteration. We have a very strong labor presence in the Connecticut legislature, and for the past few years, they have been looking to eliminate the tip credit and change to a system where all tipped employees are paid the same wage as minimum wage. So rather than the system which you're all used to, they would be paid the straight minimum wage, and they would like to see that version where it's minimum wage plus tips. It is a national movement by a group called One Fair Wage, as you could see on your screen. They're doing this in other states, other municipalities. Scott could probably talk a little bit about that later, but it's a very big push. When they come into Connecticut, they bring national people. They try to go into restaurants, maybe try to make a big press buzz about it. For our side of the issue, I think the restaurant industry, especially the association, has done an excellent job in educating Connecticut legislators as to how it really works in the industry, that it's not an industry of abuse, of harassment, et cetera, that this is a flexible industry, that employees really do like it this way. I often tell people the story of our Speaker of the House in Connecticut. He does his own poll. He goes into restaurants and asks servers and bartenders, how do you like the way you get paid? And they tell him, I love it. Please don't change it. So he doesn't even need to hear from me and Scott. And we have been lucky enough to have a lot of these legislators listen to us. They listen to the people in their districts. And we have the support of the legislature today. That could change. For us, the support is mainly in the House. The Senate is a little bit more challenging. And I think the Senate would like to see this legislation pass. The House is on our side on this issue. The interchange fee bill, which is on the screen as well. This is a bill that the CRA put forward this year. We had a small coalition with us on this bill. As you probably are aware, right now, the payment card networks include sales tax and the amount on which they interchange fees are imposed. And so it's just an extra fee that you're paying. And so we put forward a bill through the Finance Committee this year to prohibit them from being able to do that. The bill, we had a public hearing. Scott testified. He did an excellent job. The banks and credit card companies came out in full force to oppose it. This bill has popped up in other states. I think in Florida, it was close to becoming law. This was our first year on the bill. It did get voted out of the Finance Committee. It prompted quite a conversation amongst committee members. People were a little bit shocked to hear this. I think oftentimes we see a bill in its first year of being proposed. It's rare that it gets passed, and it's also rare it gets out of committee. And so it did get out of committee. It did not pass this year. I definitely expect that we'll propose it again next year. And what we'd like to do is find some kind of compromise or passage of the bill moving forward. There's a few other bills out there that did or didn't pass that we're peripherally involved in, but another bill that I didn't talk about yet is the expansion of paid sick days, which is a pretty big bill. For large restaurants, paid sick days has been something that you've lived with for over a decade. It's a law that requires you to offer basically 5 paid days off to employees based on accruing so many days after you've worked so long. It's kind of a complicated formula to get there. And so there was an effort by the governor's office, the House Democrats and the Senate Democrats. They all had bills to expand this, not just to service workers, but to all workers. So paid sick days would be law for everyone. So the bill did pass. It will basically apply to all workers rather than employers with 50 or more employees. It will be staggered and it will go down to in January of 2025, it will be 25 or more employees, and then it will eventually go down to employers with 1 or more employees. And essentially, you'll have to provide paid sick days to all of your employees. We can provide a summary as to the calculations and the accrual, but employees will accrue paid sick days once they begin working for you. A question that we get asked often is about temporary employees. For example, summer hires, people who work for 120 days or less are excluded from this law. And there is one part of the law that when the law passed in 2011 or 12 that the restaurant industry was able to negotiate, and that was when you have servers and bartenders, as we all know, they like to switch shifts rather than, in this situation, stay home for minimum wage. And so that's in the law. If an employer and employee agree that an employee could switch shifts rather than stay home for paid sick days, you don't have to provide the paid sick day. So in other words, if I say to Doug, can you take my Wednesday and I'll take your Friday? That is fine. You don't have to pay me to stay home on Wednesday and then also call Doug in to take my shift. So avoiding that double paying. If this sounds confusing, feel free to ask questions. It's a little bit of a complicated law. It is different from paid family medical leave. This is called paid sick days, so it's a little bit different. There was a piece of legislation moving on now called striking workers. This most likely wouldn't impact the restaurant industry, but it's worth noting that would provide unemployment compensation to striking workers. It wasn't going to pass in the very end of session on the last night. Legislation that would provide funding for striking workers did pass. It just hit the governor's desk on, I think, Thursday or Friday. He has indicated he's going to veto it, which is good news. So that's out there. I think that covers everything on Scott's list and my list for now. If there are other bills out there that you're aware of, you have questions of, I'm happy to answer, and certainly happy to answer anything on these bills. And I always like to plug the reaching out to your legislators, which I'm sure everyone on this presenters list will do, but I can't tell you all how important it is to build relationships with your legislators. Call them if you don't know them, introduce yourselves, invite them to a restaurant for a cup of coffee. Tell them who you are, what your employee base is like, what you add to the community in your town. It's really important. Doug knows it. I see Bryce is on here. He knows the legislators in his town. Jimmy Bitsonis is here. He knows the legislators in his town. It's just so important. They will come up to me at the Capitol and say, oh, hey, I got a call from Bryce about this bill. Can you explain it to me? Why is it bad for the industry? And then, you know, we'll go from there, and they'll share that story with their colleagues when they're sitting in the chamber listening to a debate for hours and hours. So those relationships are really helpful, and they certainly help Scott and I in our efforts to pass or kill legislation at the Capitol. So thank you all for what you do. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, putting the camera back on. Thank you, Nicole. Obviously, it's not a big group, so if you guys want to unmute yourself and ask a question, but you could definitely ask questions in the chat as we move this thing forward for anybody that's here. I don't know why my screen is freezing a lot. Can you guys still hear me at least? All right. So the other big thing, just kind of looking back as Nicole gave updates, just give you guys a lay of the land of what's happening out there nationally. As you probably know, I traveled out to Chicago for the show. I was down in DC for public affairs, kind of getting a pulse of my CEO peers of what they're feeling and some of these bills of reality of might be happening or not happening. Just a quick tip credit update for everybody. Obviously, it's been killed in Connecticut for this year, so we'll wait until 2025 as Senator Kushner shared loud and clear. We'll see you next year. But just so we are all clear around the country, it's something to keep a pulse on. As you guys see, Chicago was the last city to eliminate the tip credit. I was out there for meetings 2 weeks ago now. Actually talked to a couple independent restaurateurs out there. They are freaking out of just how they're going to manage it, what they're going to do. One of the large groups is Let Us Entertain You, one of the largest independent operators in the Chicago and DC area. But you know, so that is obviously eliminating. It's on a pathway to eliminate. The state of Illinois tried to do that this past session. So leading into Chicago's one fair wage win, they tried to bring it to the state capitol. That has since been killed. Thanks to the efforts of the Illinois Restaurant Association, but also National Restaurant Association and Mike Whatley, which was a big win that it's not going to happen in Illinois, even though they tried to say, well, if Chicago does it, let's have the whole state eliminate tip credit. So they're at least going to have to wait to do that again. But there's 3 other states that, well, actually 4 that I think we all want to be very much aware of out there. And they're all in what I like to call purple states, because they're not red, they're not blue, they're kind of in the middle. And one is Michigan. Michigan they tried to put it on the ballot for the presidential election. And as of Friday, Justin Winslow got a win in the courts. It is not going to go on the ballot to eliminate the tip credit in the state of Michigan during the presidential election. It was a huge win for Michigan and their efforts to keep the tip credit and preserve the tip credit. The other 3 states, though, are still in some battles. So you have Arizona, you have Ohio, and you have Massachusetts. Those are all different than Illinois or than us, because they have, like I said before, ballot initiatives where One Fair Wage is trying to put the elimination of tip credit to the general public on the presidential ballot in 24. Kind of talk to each of these states and these CEOs and what's going on. Can't sit here and tell you whether any of them will get on the ballot. I'm hoping that none of them do, but they all are in their different kind of parts of their challenging pieces right now. So I think we all want to be aware of it, especially our neighbor up in Massachusetts. They're in a legal fight right now. They're questioning the signatures that are needed to be put on the ballot, and they're trying to obviously say that the signatures aren't valid or not enough of them, and they're fighting it in other ways at the state capitol in Massachusetts. But obviously, if the tip credit was to be eliminated in Massachusetts, we know how much harder our fight would become in Connecticut. So I want everyone just to be clear of that. Ohio, same type of thing. And then obviously Arizona, they're kind of all in this summer kind of battle to see if I think the deadlines are kind of mid-July of whether or not it'll actually be on each of the state ballots. But I'll keep everybody posted. But something you should keep track of if you've got. I know Frank, and I'll just a second, comes from California, and obviously most of the West Coast states, California, Oregon, Washington, do not have a tip credit. But there's other fun things happening in California, and not only with the tip credit elimination, and I'll let Frank kind of give his sense of what he's seen in California, but kind of the other updates as well. Junk fees has become the fun bill that everyone wanted to put forward as a state, led by attorney generals across the country this year. This whole they like to using the Taylor Swift Ticketmaster as kind of the leading tip of the spear of why they needed to eliminate junk fees. But and there's a couple battles going on. So obviously the junk fee bill in Connecticut did not pass, with the work of our team, but there's junk fee bills across the country that have passed. One in particular is California. I'll get to that one second, but also the Federal Trade Commission led by the Biden administration has ruled that you can't use junk fees in restaurants. Pretty specific language that we are pushing back. If you get Nationals emails, which you're all members, hopefully you should get those. The 90-second update from Sean Kennedy is very, very powerful, talking about what you can do. And we're just trying to have messaging coming out. I'm actually working with Blumenthal's team and others to see if we can get some of the federal delegates to sign on to a letter, because I don't think the goals of the FTC with junk fees was to try to put restaurants into this bill, and especially caterers. The other piece to this, and why Doug is on here as well, the junk fee conversation with caterers is huge. You guys know, if you have restaurants and you cater events, you have fees added on, whether it's linen, whether it's furniture, whether it's staff, whether it's it's the service charge, all the things that you do to. And I see the Sean Kennedy piece in the chat. Thank you, Yvette. But know that also what has happened recently is the Attorney General in California about 3 weeks ago stood up at a podium and took their junk fee bill and extended it to define that restaurants can no longer use service charges in the state of California, and caterers can no longer use fees and service charges, which was not a part of the bill that was actually signed into law. So I have a call this afternoon with the California Restaurant Association to find out what the heck is going on and how that's going to affect all of us, kind of like tip credit, around the country. I actually talked to Jonathan Jennings on our board, who's the chairman of the International Caterers Association, because they have about 4 California caterers on that board, and they are trying to find out what they can do. And obviously they are freaking out a little bit, as you guys can imagine. So the junk fee bill is something that isn't going away. We're just trying to get definition and clarity and trying to protect our industry in any way that we can. Obviously, there's not a state bill right now, which is a good thing, but federally, there could be an FTC ruling, and also what's happening in 2025 session based on what happens with these other states. And we're trying to keep a keen eye on California, in regards to what the Attorney General and Governor Newsom is stating for restaurants. So those are kind of the junk fee. And then the last thing I'll bring up on a national front, the state of Illinois, I found out on Thursday, kudos to them. Not only did they eliminate the not having tip credit, but they also got the interchange fee bill passed on credit cards, which is a huge win, because a lot of our delegates this year said, well, no other state has passed this yet. We don't want to be the first. There's too many questions. But realistically, it's a great thing that Illinois did get that thing over the hurdle. As you guys know, if you don't know what that bill is, you pay credit card fees, as Nicole said, on collecting state sales tax. You pay about 2.5%, on average, 2 to 2.5%. If you have American Express, 3.5%, 4%. We are trying to eliminate having to pay the VIG on sales tax collection. So obviously the bill didn't pass this year, but we are now going to bring this bill hard forward again in 25 and use this Illinois bill passing as a huge win. Hopefully it's the first domino to fall for a lot of states that want to get that done. So stop there, halfway into this. Appreciate this, and I don't want to introduce you guys, I guess, fully in this way. I think you guys should at least introduce yourselves. So I'm going to start with one of our board members, and Doug Pelestena, who's been now on the board a little over a year. But Doug, please give a quick update of who you are and what you represent, and what part of the state you're in as well.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, Scott, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for watching today. So my name is Doug Pelestena. As Scott mentioned, I have been on the board for a little bit over a year now. I got involved with the Connecticut Restaurant Association during COVID, and I'm one of the owners of a catering venue in Danbury, Connecticut, known as the Amber Colonnade. So the Amber, we're an independent venue, and we host all types of events, small events, large events, and we do events up to 700 people. So when laws and legislation pass or don't pass, it directly affects our business, especially when it comes to junk fees, as Scott just mentioned. I can't explain enough how much or how important the CRA is to our business, and especially during the dark times, as we all know, with COVID, it really was a huge asset to us. And by getting involved and learning and understanding everything that goes on, it's just really propelled our business completely. And I highly recommend that everybody on this call gets involved in one way or another.
Thanks, Doug. Before I start rattling off questions, I want to make sure we get all of I know Emily hopefully will get a chance to join us, but our other esteemed guest is Frank Klein from Post Road Hospitality. But Frank, give a quick update and your background, which I think will be definitely influential for people listening as a owner operator.
Sure. I'm a transplant from California as of 5 years ago. For 30 years, operated fine dining and fast casual restaurants in California. We currently have an Asian chain in California that's up to 18 what we call revenue producing venues with 10 brick and mortars, several ghost kitchens and food halls are in. We're also in multiple airports, a national park, and the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. So we developed that brand starting in about 2011. So we definitely have 13 years of war stories from the California legislation and governors and everyone else. Fortunately, we're doing well. However, it does get tougher and tougher to operate with all the legislative hits that are being taken. And even though we're relatively small, we are being considered now as the big guy because we're in Northern and Southern California, and geographic kicks in certain things in California. So we have that. We're developing a couple restaurants in Fairfield, Connecticut right now. And one of the long-standing things my teammates and I have done is we have FK Restaurants and Hospitality, which has consulted with over 300 clients around the world, actually. But also what it does is it gets us into the nitty-gritty of a lot of operations and how legislations, laws, everything affects the profitability and the bottom line of a restaurant. In California, there is nothing that the government doesn't have their fingers in right now, between what packaging you use, how much you have to pay people, what schedule you have to give them, everything from tariffs on specific vendors, taxes, double payroll taxes. It's very interesting what can happen very quickly. And we've seen that in our own businesses and all of our consulting clients too. It's not a myth. It does start to happen. It does start to snowball very, very quickly, as we've seen.
No, thank you, Frank. All right. So before I'm going to have a couple questions for our guests here, but first thing is I appreciate Scott using the Q&A part of our teams as I'm trying to learn teams as well. So you asked a question back with Nicole about paid sick days, and yes, that bill did pass and what that means. So you asked about 120 days. Yes, you have to have employees that work 120 days before they become eligible So they use the term seasonal employees in kind of the language of the law, but realistically, it's really anybody that comes to work for you. If they do not hit that threshold of 120 days within a calendar year, they are not eligible. Am I correct in the way that I've phrased that, Nicole?
Wait, say that again, Scott?
They have to hit 120 days before they become eligible.
Well, so I guess let me just say it the other way. The seasonal employees are exempt. So if you're a summer worker, you don't have to provide paid sick days to them.
Yes.
Okay, so you accrue the sick day, you accrue the sick time by how long you're working. So you accrue it by instead of getting it like annually as soon as you start working, you accrue it up to I think it's like 30 hours. Once you work, you start accruing the sick time. Like for every 30 hours, you accrue it. If that makes sense.
Correct, but I apologize, guys. Obviously, these are new bills and languages that we are trying to get our arms around with on a legal side. But let us continue to dig into this, Scott, for you and for everybody else. Know that right now, anyone with 50 or more employees is already in this bill. It's been in it for 10 years. The threshold on January 1st will go to 25 or more employees.
Right.
January 1st, 2025, January 1st, 2026, it'll go to 10 or more employees. And then January 1st, 2027 will be 1 or more employees. So,
and you start accruing it on the day you're hired. So you get hired on January 1st, 2025, you start accruing the paid sick time. And you get 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, up to 5 days a year.
But the exempt language on which I think that's what he was asking, the exempt language on seasonal, because there was more of a definition of how you are seasonal and how many days you have to be on the payroll, I believe.
That's 120 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The goal there was for the summer workers.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But if you only, let's say you're not a summer restaurant or like you work harder in the winter or cater or something, if you only work for a couple months, you're not going to become eligible.
Correct.
Okay. All right. All right. Stay on that bill for for longer than we need to. All right. So Doug, can you talk for those that don't know, I guess my first question for you is what are you feeling out there in Danbury? I say out there, but out in Danbury with the Amber Room, and I like to call him the prom king because I think he hosts more proms than anyone in the state. I actually think that's a fact. But now that you're 3.5, 4 years removed from COVID, kind of through all of those pieces, what are you seeing? Like it sounds like from the business side, what are things that are going well, and then what are some things that are concerning or kind of keep you up at night?
Absolutely. So it's been interesting. It's definitely been an interesting 4 years since COVID. Obviously, some competition has shaken out, which is never, it has pluses and minuses, but you never want to see anybody just decide to up and leave. The business aspect, so we've been fortunate and have been busier in terms of events that we're hosting. We see lately a little bit of a trend of numbers going down as far as guest counts go. And that's a little concerning because in our business, it always happens a few years ahead of time, right? You book events a year or 2 years beforehand, and then the event takes place. We're a little bit in a unique situation because obviously we have contracts. So once a contract is in place, we don't go back and change the pricing for that particular contract. One of the challenges that we've had, as I'm sure most of you have had, is the influx in pricing when it comes to goods, whether that be eggs or oil. These things have a direct impact on the bottom line. Oil has shot through the roof, as everyone knows. Eggs have gone up. Poultry has been all over the place. Steak has finally come down a little bit, but those really take a big effect on us. One of our other biggest challenges since COVID is just managing payroll. It's great to be busier, but when you're busier, you have a higher payroll, you have more staff that's on. If we're doing an event of 500, well, that's 20 plus people that we have on the floor, plus our kitchen, plus so forth. So every time the minimum wage gets increased, it's really a huge challenge. We're paying more in expense when it comes to payroll than we ever had before, and it's mind-boggling when we always pay higher than minimum wage. Well, minimum wage right now is $15.69, and that's still, and we're paying on average $16, $17, $18 an hour for people, and sometimes it's still not enough to retain good talent. So that's one of the biggest challenges. My concern is that, especially when it comes to minimum wage, that it's increasing again come January 1st, which a lot of people may or may not know. And that has a direct impact again on the bottom line. I don't see there being a cap on that anytime soon. And every year that's going to keep increasing. So that's certainly, between rising food costs and rising payroll, those are our two biggest challenges. And obviously, with the election coming up in November, I think a lot of people are hesitant to see what they're going to be spending in the future.
No, it's great, Doug. And yes, unfortunately, from a minimum wage in Connecticut, so people that are listening hopefully know, it is indexed as part of the conversation. So the first index increase happened this past January when it went up 69 cents to from $15 to $15.69. It is based on ECI, Employment Cost Index. It's not CPI, which in some ways could be good, some ways could be challenging, because the CPI I know some states that have CPI indexing, and it goes up well over $1, like $1.60, I think last year, versus our 69 cents. But we won't know what that increase is until the fall. How it works is, so everyone knows, the ECI is set and there's updates every quarter, but it's a full year quarter look. And I believe it's November 1st is when they get the data from the year look back of whether the ECI moved up or down. If it moves down, then unfortunately the minimum wage doesn't go down, but there's no increase. But know that this is a conversation that we are trying to start to have, and you should be having at a legislative level, because right now it doesn't have a stopgap. 1010 was there and was flat for a number of years, and then obviously we talked about increasing it, but there's parts that are good or bad. But yeah, 69 cents, 70 cents was not the intent of that index when it was put in place. I believe, when Speaker of the House at the time, when I just started here, we looked at that index and it looked like at the highest it was like 26 cents, but on average it was like 16 or 17 cents in indexing, which over 5 years is $1, which I think everyone can manage. But if you're looking to go up 70, at one point, so you guys know, ECI 2 years ago would have went up like $1.45. So it has luckily peaked and come down post-COVID, but that index is based on the employment cost index is actually the increases you pay to employees, and it's not just minimum wage workers, it's all workers. So as you guys know, as costs go up, you're paying accountants, lawyers, teachers, everybody more, and that's the percentage increase from year over year that continues to go up, and then that increase is what sets our minimum wage. So don't have good news to share with you, Doug, or anyone on this call, but I do think it's a real conversation as we continue to grow our industry and to talk about, because 1569 puts us, I believe, in the top 5% for minimum wages across the country, 5 to 10%. And then also, yes, there's federally talking about increasing the federal minimum wage, which I believe is $7.85. And the tip credit is $2.75, I believe, is the federal tip, and the federal minimum wage, which is still in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, not far away. So it's crazy where we are. So really, really interesting, Doug, of what you're seeing, and obviously going to continue to follow up with questions. I'm going to turn my question to Frank. Frank, with your experience in California, and you talked a little bit about this at our event we had a couple weeks ago at Little Pub. What I guess everyone likes to say it's like the boogeyman, or I get tabbed the California, the East Coast, with some of these legislative kind of plans or ideas or bills that somehow come forward. But you kind of making the trek here to Connecticut, Is it as bad as California? Is it as scary you as much? Do you think that is California as bad as everyone says it is from the outside looking in, but to run a business, but like what is I guess the reality of that statement and what you see because you've actually done it and run businesses in that state?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question. And I can very directly say, it is as bad as they say in California. It seems like the restaurants are the ones that are picked on most, and whether they need revenue or whether there's legislators out there that in some way feel sorry for what should be transient workers in the restaurant business. And it's difficult to see it unless you're in it. You can look at our P&L. So our fast casuals used to be between 22 to 25% was the platinum standard for return, 20 to 23 was the gold, and then 16 to 20 was like, you're doing good, but you could do better. And now getting above that 20% threshold in California is getting harder and harder for like larger brands, even like Mendocino Farms and Cava. And when they release their numbers, if you take out California, I mean, if you put back in California, it's harder. So like I said before, there is legislation on every single aspect of a restaurant business. And they carve out, like we have a restaurant in downtown LA that's about a block away from CVS, a drugstore. Well, we have to pay more than CVS does as a restaurant. And I don't understand that. It doesn't make sense as to why there's this punitive penalty for a restaurant worker that also may have access to tips. I don't remember the last time anybody ever tipped a CVS employee. So, these wage rates that are almost punitive, payroll taxes that are almost punitive. California keeps themselves in this constant state of insolvency so that they can get extra fees. I mean, even, I still, I have a car that's in California that's registered. The first year it was registered, it was like $269. Now it's gone down in value, but now it's almost $900 to register the car. So on an annual basis, it's not like 3 years in Canada, that's an annual basis. So I would say, yes, it is bad. I say that people watched it happen. Our attorneys at Greenberg Traurig and Davis Wright Tremaine are pretty big in the legislative actions for California, and they're just watching very irrational decisions happening that are really, like I say, punitive against the restaurant industry, and it's tough. Now, is Connecticut as bad? No. People laugh at me because I always say Connecticut functions way better than California in a rational standpoint. However, that California thing that was like 20 years ago when California did emission standards, New York would just adopt it and say, we're not going to even look at it. It's going to be easy to do. My fear is that states like Connecticut are going to start doing that with California legislation, which really isn't rational. I mean, California has got a lot of punitive actions against restaurants that are very dangerous if they start coming into an environment like Connecticut, and they're starting to roll up. And it's getting very, very expensive. As Douglas was saying, it's not only food costs, it's labor costs, it's everything. Now in California, I don't know what the legislation says now, Nicole, but for the paid time off, we have to have those reserves in an account that is audited. So we actually, like, if we owe Doug 5 days of sick pay, we have to have that money held separately in an account in case he comes due with that shit. That's dangerous. I mean, so it's getting harder and harder to keep onto your cash flow. And my fear is that Connecticut will start doing the Californication of all those legislative acts that really make it difficult. Because like Douglas said, there's a lot of headwinds enough with wage rates and how much food costs and how much packaging costs. And it's not minimum wage anymore. It's minimum wage plus 20% in Connecticut. That's what people have to pay to keep good health. So Nicole, I'm not sure if that's part of the legislation.
Yeah, it's not. But unfortunately, I feel like, California comes up with these terrible ideas and Connecticut thinks they're the most fantastic ideas ever. And we like to jump on that bandwagon. When I say we, our labor folks were so proud of themselves. We were the first state to pass paid sick days back in 2011 or 12. And I have to say, for this industry, our larger members have mostly said it hasn't impacted them because no one really uses it, right? So servers and bartenders want their tips. So it proves our what we've been arguing for years on why we don't want to eliminate the tip credit. Servers and bartenders want their tips. No one wants to stay home for minimum wage. And so this year, when the bill was starting to get so much support, all of these other industries now that it's going to impact, they came kind of running to us saying, help us, help us. And we said, well, we've had this for 10 years. Now it's certainly going to impact smaller restaurants with fewer employees. Maybe people will start using it. Maybe they won't. It might be different people in the restaurant industry, but we were the ones fighting it 10 years ago, and we fought it very valiantly for 6 or 7 years before it finally passed in Connecticut. So I'm hoping that they don't come back and tweak it. But sometimes these bad ideas get worse and they do come back and try to make changes to it. I think they might see, how it works for a few years before they make changes to it. The bill did call for some kind of working group in it, a task force in it to study paid sick days. So that task force, depending on who gets appointed to it, will study paid sick days and come back with probably some new recommendations. So that's all remains to be seen.
Yeah, and the reason California has the have it in the bank thing, because it's, you can use it, you get it cashed out. So if anything, it should be a use it or lose it. And nobody should at December 20th either take 5 days off, or December 26th through take the days off or get cashed out, because that's the danger. The danger is if they start saying that it's got to accrue and it's got to be a cash value, then it becomes very, very, that's something we have to stop. Like we have to get involved.
Right.
Not that happened.
Right. And our big argument was always, we're different than an office job where, if someone calls in sick, that paperwork, that office job can wait until the next day. In the restaurant industry, it's a right now business. So, if you have 3 servers call out on a Friday, you're double paying. You're paying those 3 to stay home and 3 more to come in, which is why we were able to negotiate that piece of the switching shifts. Because who doesn't want to do that? Who wouldn't rather take the other shifts and make their tips? And we made that argument successfully with the House Speaker, and he said that's absolutely staying in the legislation for the restaurant industry. And, hopefully that's how things go, and it still runs as smoothly as it has for us. It's part of, what you have to tell your employees as HR, that this is the law. When we shared, Scott and I shared this with some people, we're expanding it. People that it's impacted for years have said, no one's ever used it. It's really just not a problem. And, we cross our fingers and hope that it stays that way. But depending on how these pro-labor people are out there, they're trying to get into these restaurants, as we all know, and they find creative ways to get in there to try to get employees to unionize or just tell them about their rights. So we'll see what happens with them trying to tell people, oh, don't forget you have this, don't forget you have that. Make sure your employer allows you to do this, that, or the other thing. I still maintain that employees in restaurants, the tipped ones especially, prefer to switch shifts, but we'll see what happens.
No, good conversation here on the, I guess, piece of California. I guess before I ask Doug another question, Frank, just back to you. And I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but why do you think, was it a lack of voice from the industry? Why do you think California's restaurants have been targeted so heavily? And maybe, or do you think they have a strong voice in the state legislature and it's just, thank God they do, it would be even worse, or like they waited too long? Like, what are your thoughts on what you've seen over a couple decades in California? And maybe, can't make any promises in Connecticut, but like from our side as an association, what do we want to not allow to have happen, to your point, in Connecticut?
Well, I mean, Gavin Newsom started out as a restaurateur. I mean, he had a silver spoon in his mouth, but he was a restaurateur. He owned a winery. He had service elements and he knows a P&L backwards and forwards, which is the scariest part. I think what happened was there's some very powerful voices on the progressive liberal side that have focused like a laser on restaurants because restaurants often don't fight back. Restaurateurs don't fight back. They're too friggin' busy, but they also need to be drawn into the fold more. So I think the louder the Connecticut Restaurant Association got and the more powerful attorney and lobbyists they brought in to be ahead of the game, not jumping into the battle in the middle, but being ahead of it, I think they've been able to make a lot of pushback, but still not enough. The political makeup of Sacramento, it's good. It's been a supermajority for 30 years. So if it gets into a certain lane, it's almost impossible to stop it. The key is, how do you stop it from getting in that lane? And the more restaurateurs that are there and explaining it to people and telling their personal stories that I'm a franchisee, and if you raise rates this much, my family income goes down 30 to 40%. Those personal stories, I think, have helped in California for the most part. But I think in Connecticut, that's what has to happen. Those personal stories of restaurateurs through the Connecticut Restaurant Association and the legislator. I think Connecticut's just small town enough right now to kind of start stopping that, but it takes more active involvement in those personal stories. If not, you're just an entity that everybody's taking advantage of, a fast food worker. That's the California mindset.
Yeah, this helps me lead into my great question with Doug. Doug, so can you talk a little bit about, Danbury and some of the legislators and legislators and the relationships you have? And I'll tell my story after you, but what you're seeing in a kind of a city that, it's kind of split. You've had a Republican mayor, and then he left and went to work for a Democratic governor. Then you had another Republican mayor on his staff. Now you have a Democratic mayor that you know well. But then you also have, a state senator that is the lead proponent of kind of unionization, in my opinion, and tip credit elimination and those. And you have a great relationship with her. But at the same time, you talk a little bit about the makeup of Danbury and how important you see your voice and other restaurateurs and caterers' voices are in not only the state, but specifically in your area.
Absolutely. So Danbury is a very interesting place. I always tell people that aren't familiar with Danbury that it is a big city, but a very small town. Everybody knows everybody for the most part, and Amberum's been in business for 55 years. So anything that happens, whether it's politically or a city event of some sort, generally takes place at the Amberum. So we've been very fortunate to build those relationships, and we always try our best to stay as neutral as possible, right down the middle. We've solidified very good friendships with both R's and D's, and they all know that we're not gonna, for the most part, take any sides, right? Because that's just a good business decision. But what is very important is those relationships. As Scott just mentioned, we do have very good relationships with our legislatures. We do have Senator Kushner represents the Danbury area. And although we don't agree on certain things, we find common ground and we talk about it. And the nice thing is having those relationships. While Senator Kushner might not always listen to what Scott has to say, sometimes when I can bring up certain aspects of a bill and explain why it directly affects us, it's a lot more receptive from that. So, and we do constantly talk to our legislators, whether it's our state reps, our city council, our mayor. We tell them what's going on and how some of these decisions directly impact. Even when there's an event, I have no problem going up to state rep and say, listen, this bill's coming out. Why, are you for it? Are you against it? This is how it impacts us. Danbury in census, I think, has 85,000 residents, but in reality, probably closer to 120,000. We have the largest high school in the state. We have everything, again, that a major city has. So there's a lot going on in Danbury. There's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of different styles of restaurants. And what I do, at least for me personally, is highlight and point out some of the proposed bills that may or may not take place and how that it's not only going to affect me, but it's going to affect our community. And Scott has come down to Danbury to host roundtables with both mayors, whether it was the previous administration or the current administration. And that really, really helps, especially our current mayor has very good relationships with all of our legislatures. Right now, our House reps, the majority is our Ds, and we have one R along with our state senator as well. Our current mayor happens to be a D, but is very, very close with all of them. So when we talk to our mayor or city council and we tell them, hey, this is happening, it's not just me saying it, but it's coming from City Hall as well. And that has ripple effects.
Yeah, Doug, and I think that's a big part of today's call for people that are listening and hopefully get a chance to watch the recording is I use you as a perfect example of why the CRA has become more successful as a whole. The story of meeting Doug and knowing his relationship within Danbury, but Senator Kushner, as many of you might know, she has been the proponent of the elimination of tip credit bill in Connecticut since its inception. We will never agree on her feeling on that. But using Doug as a catalyst to give me opportunities to meet with her, for her to actually be open that, hey, my favorite Doug line was, he's not really such a bad guy. He actually is, does care about the industry. But it means a lot when it comes from someone that she respects and starts to understand the industry. And I think back to Frank's point, it's critical that we continue to be that small town independent voice and can't stop that because, it's tip credit today, it's paid sick days, it's predictive scheduling, it's junk fees. Tomorrow it could be a FAST Act bill, which is the California minimum wage. It could be, we don't know what the future holds. It was, captive audience a couple of years ago. Like there's always going to be legislation that's out there that someone thinks it's going to change the world and be better, but it actually in the long run could hurt our industry. And we have to be able to voice that. And as much as I try to do my best, Nicole inside the Capitol building every day tries to do it. It's a whole different conversation when we can say, hey, Doug, can you call Senator Kushner and just have a conversation with her? Specifically, can you actually speak to her? And she go, oh, well, you're a caterer, you don't care about tip credit, but the long-term effects of how that can affect your business, which you're seeing with junk fees right now, with service charges and what's happening out there on the national landscape. So I hope people are listening to that. And I encourage you, if you don't have a relationship, but with your state rep or state senator, we will introduce you today. Hands down, reach out to us and say, hey, I just purchased and if you have multiple restaurants, you need to have those in all the areas where you are employing people. The greatest thing about restaurants in my world and Nicole's world is everyone loves restaurants and caterers and private event venues. They go out to eat, they do these things. So use that to our advantage to have these conversations. But I do get frustrated sometimes where a restaurateur will say, well, I'm one person in one location. What difference can I really make? How can I actually make an impact? And Doug's a perfect example of a huge impact that we have made in the city of Danbury. And I'll also, and on the legislative side, as ask another question for Frank, but we don't know who the future governor is going to be. We don't know who the new state senator of Danbury is going to be. We don't know who the mayor of Danbury is going to be 8 years from now. But a good guess is it's probably coming out of the city council or someone at a local level that starts to build a reputation and wants to grow in those fields. And if we can start to build grassroots relationships now, and that's why we do roundtables and we go and meet with mayors and first selectmen's and having the mayor of Danbury, because I always say some of these politicians are fit for higher office. That's what they want. And if we can try to educate them on our industry early on, it gives us a fighting chance, to Frank's point, when they're sitting as Governor Newsom and they were a former restaurateur and maybe we built a relationship with him 25 years earlier or 15 years earlier. and we say, hey, remember when you were worried about your P&L and you were worried about this is actually the new reality of restaurants, and you need to understand that if you allow this bill to go through, what it's going to do to me, what it's going to do to the industry. And I think that's why it's critical on the amount of time that we spend at the CRA working at the local level, because those relationships are critical. And I think making sure why you get involved in the CRA isn't as much to just say, hey, I'm a member, I pay dues. It's being active. Advocacy isn't something that just happens, and relationships and conversations are the key to this. So kind of shifting on that like gear, Frank, kind of the other piece to this is, we talked about this at Little Pub. This is kind of to the restaurateurs that are listening in, and as I traveled out to Chicago and got a chance to see 8 football fields of every new tech company, and everyone else has some new idea, whatever else. But can you talk a little bit about, as an independent restaurant, as your kind of consulting hat, I guess, for a second, like how important, and use the word diversify yourself and your business a lot in a Little Pub conversation, which I thought was critical. But for someone listening that either just started a business or has been in the same business for 15, 20 years, how critical is that word and what they should be doing right now and be thinking about and utilizing the CRA or others to help them?
Well, and we use differentiation a lot, and differentiation means a lot of things. It means experiential to drive people to your restaurant. It means the style of service that you're doing to maximize your revenues. What is your differentiating factor with your wine beer list? But then the differentiating factor to help you on the back end with the issues facing the Connecticut Restaurant Association is the dirty little word, but I'm from Palo Alto and Los Angeles, so I use it a lot, which is tech stack. And there's so many people coming up with, if you excuse the term, bullshit technology, trying to push on a restaurateur, and you got to get this, and it's gonna, oh my God, restaurateurs are the dumbest people in the world, but this is gonna help you. And it's like, you got to filter through that noise right now. And there's a couple pieces of tech that can really help you to be better at these compliance things, whether it's a good app about the, like Nicole was talking about, switching schedules. Like if you can make it easier just on your phone for the servers to change schedules, that's a really good technology. If you can notify people about training issues on your phone, that's a good technology. If you can try to find technology to differentiate yourself, whether it's you're using Square and it becomes a kiosk part of the day, that's a differentiating factor. Does it match with the experiential need in your restaurant? So I used to sit in my office in California, Palo Alto, and I remember the first day Tony Huang from DoorDash came into my offices and said, I want access to your POS, and I want to sit at the busiest Asian box, and I want to learn everything. And we said, okay, well, let's negotiate first. So we got a legacy rate for his tech to deliver, and then we learned about his business, but we also became like the first and second largest client at the time. However, he created a beast, and now we're all dealing with that. But it's a necessary evil. How do you try to reduce those 30% fees into 20%? How do you do the over under with the add-ons? All this stuff right now is just so overwhelming. What I recommend to people is focus on your differentiation. How do you draw more people into experiential dining as traffic counts go down? As Douglas said, less events. What can you do? So without trying to tell anybody their business, without knowing their business, how do you differentiate? How do you get up and spend a couple hours every week with the noise crowded out to say, how can I make my business a little bit hipper, a little bit cooler, and make people come back? What technology, whether it's a loyalty app that I can directly get to people without discounting, because I'm a very big advocate of not discounting through loyalty apps. It's more about you get the coolest thing at 10 p.m. or you get a happy hour special, but nobody else does, unless you've been in my restaurant already 5 or 6 times. That's good technology. The training and the HR technology on a phone, because everybody's on their phone, that's good technology. But I always tell people, differentiate yourself without being overwhelmed, and don't get in the weeds of crap that you don't need, because in summary, everybody thinks restaurateurs for some reason just need all this saving, and you don't. You need a couple pieces of tech and a couple pieces of differentiation to improve your business. And it's fairly simple and straightforward to do. I don't know if that directly answered your question, but that's my 2 cents. People are trying to get this 6 pieces of a tech stack, and you're never going to use it. focus on one or two things you can implement, crowd out the noise.
So
Yeah.
Frank, we
Go
shouldn't
ahead, Doug.
get the robot servers then, right? That they show at the shows.
Hey, Sweetgreen's is killing it with their robot stores, but in the end, what are they really doing, Douglas? I mean, they're a public company that has a great halo over them, but what are they doing? It's bullshit. They are literally trying to save money on labor, and they're trying to maximize their sales per square foot, which is great for a shareholder value, and they're a public company. Is that great for you in your restaurant as a neighborhood in Danbury where people are trying to create a symbiotic relationship with their family on the first communion, or their family on the bar mitzvah, or the family? No, it's not. It's not that way. So technology is good. You need to have it, but use it prudently and keep that relationship with your customer.
David put his video on. David, do you have a question? Dave? Might not even know. You're on mute. Can get him on. Unmute him. I don't know if we, with our panel thing, if we can, but no, I was overwhelmed, Frank. It was my first time to the show, and I was just like, whoa, I'm not even having to run a restaurant business, but I think you're right. But I also think, as I see in the resources that we try to provide at the CRA, we're trying to get through the weeds a little bit of how we can help each of your businesses in different ways. I think it is reality as you make the jokes about robots, or everyone hears the word AI and they're thinking that Will Smith's coming out with robots in your back, but there are opportunities with AI. I think from an efficiency side that I think doesn't need to scare people yet, that there are some products that are out there that can hopefully help you with certain labor, and maybe not the experiential part of the labor, but even just trying to deal with that on my own, so I can help each of you guys in your business. Because I think at the end of the day, we talk about it all the time, like you guys aren't. I love that Frank said that some of these companies think that you guys aren't smart, don't know what you're doing, but I actually think the complete opposite. You're the most entrepreneurial business owners there are. And I say that to legislators all the time as well, in media. Like, you survived a complete shutdown and COVID and a virus, and were threatened that you were no one should go out to a wedding, in Doug's world, or should go to a restaurant because you're unsafe. And you guys weathered that storm, and now are people now view how important this industry is, and especially the independent side. So such great points. Doug, kind of back to you with the future, I guess, of large scale events and kind of catering, and how do you guys diversify yourself at the Amber Room, because you've been around so long and so many people know you, but what are you doing with your team now that as you guys think big picture and planning?
So as Frank said, you always have to have something unique, right? It's about, our niche is really about customization. So besides just doing a wedding or a prom or whatever event it might be, we take it to another step. So we ask questions. We want to know what it's about, what the vision is, and then we customize it based on what the client's preference is. So it's not just, here's your wedding in a box, you can't change anything. It's what's your favorite thing? How are we going to do that? We just hosted Danbury High's prom, and we get very involved with the proms and the themes and so forth. So, and of course, there's charges for that kind of stuff. But what we did for that particular prom is they had a god and goddess themed prom. Not exactly the easiest thing to come up with extras for that, but we hired a living statue actor, we had living statues, we did ice sculptures, we did custom logos, we had furniture all throughout the room. So we created an experience for those students to remember, and the feedback was great. I mean, we always host Danbury High Prom, but we had an immediate deposit and contract for next year already, and the students are still talking about that particular prom. So it's really important for us to just go to these trade shows, go to conferences, have the conversations with other caterers, learn and understand that, hey, we can always improve our product. And how do we do that? Whether that's food or getting creative with outside event services. The other thing that is that for us, we always have to keep updating and always doing something new, because the challenge that we face is we have sometimes clients that are there 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week, just for different events, especially now during May and June. We had somebody, which was a perfect example. We had a breakfast and a corporate event the other day at the same time. And we had one client that was actually in the breakfast and then walked over to the corporate event because she was part of that event as well. So it's how do we differentiate our events, but also keeping updated. We just redid our whole courtyard last summer, and that was a big win for us because it's another space for people to have events. So that's really important. But one thing that is also concerning with the future, so Frank mentioned with DoorDash the 30%. Now we personally, because we're a catering venue, don't experience that, but I know a lot of restaurateurs do. We have other expenses that we have to incur, whether that's linen charges, environmental fees, garbage companies charging cost recovery fees, and the fees just add up and add up and add up. My concern, as you mentioned, Scott, from a national level is with the Federal Trade Commission and specific with these junk fees, because I think, yes, there's certain elements, whether it was Connecticut State Bill Senate 3, which essentially just stated you have to list those fees, but it's doing away with them completely. How does a restaurant that has a 30% increase with DoorDash or takes a 30% haircut, and then all of a sudden they're not allowed to charge delivery fees, or that has to be incorporated into all their menus for their restaurant? It doesn't really add up. And for us, with the service charge, that is an operational charge. We explain it, we have it on everything. But if all of a sudden we have to increase our prices by 20 or 25%, the general public gets a little concerned with that because it's not the same. But when we explain it as it is now, people understand it. But just getting a price sheet and seeing these prices a lot higher, it gives people pause. And those are always our concerns and challenges for the future.
No, it's a great point, Doug. And I think so. You guys are, and we're listening in as well. And Nicole and I talk about this a lot about the junk fees. I'm going to answer the question on the Q&A as well, but it is about transparency. I think where we got kind of the bill to eventually die in Connecticut because we said it was going too far and it was starting to really drive home at our industry as a whole and hospitality as a whole, about as long as you're transparent, it's upfront. If you have a service charge, one of the questions are, if you have a party of 8 or more, that you're open to a potential added fee, which you can do right now. So one of the questions was, do I have to change up my pricing and pivot now? No. Obviously the FTC ruling, which should maybe come down before the presidential election, maybe not, maybe get overruled if another president steps in. I can't predict the future. No one can. But right now, as of today, the way you're doing business, you can continue to do those things. But I think to your point, Doug, it is about educating. It's the same way about tip credit. When a legislator is like, oh, you only pay people $6.38 an hour. How dare you do that? It's like, no. It's a credit. It's not actually a wage, and it's the same way with junk fees of like, don't put us in the cell phone company conversation that we're going to say it's $49 a month and you're paying $94 because there's 800 fees. And my other favorite part about all this that we continue to, as we talked in DC, is, what the state government and the government is totally fine giving you fees if you tried to register your car, to Frank's earlier point, or whatever else, and now you're paying some tourist like $30 fee the other day on something I had to register for, about touring the state or whatever. Like they'll add fees all you want. It's not part of the start, but you see it at the end. But I do think there's got to be a happy medium. We got to find, the whole Ticketmaster, and I'm going to go on StubHub and try to find 2 tickets to a concert, and they're saying they're $80 a piece, and you go to check out and you're now paying $135 because they like to add charges. Or I was at parking in Hartford the other day, and it was my favorite. They had a $4 technology fee when you use the QR code, but there was no staff working. So I was like, well, how do I, it's $10 to park plus a $4 technology fee. Like those things are not the intent of our world of what we do. And I think that people are taking advantage of it. And that's where legislators get frustrated, which I agree with them. But I think that we have to do our job by creating our voice and saying, listen, we're okay with X, but as long as we're putting it on the menu, as long as when Doug gives you a contract, we say per head, for a wedding, but here's your added fees. And then if you want to add stuff on top of that, you want to have a goddess, and have a statue, we can do that. But obviously there's fees incorporated with that. I think that's where we're really just trying to be clear and concise. And I think finding friends at a federal level, at a state, and at a local level is critical for them to understand. Because just to Frank's point, I just learned that Gavin Newsom was a restaurateur. The same way that, Dante Bartholomew, our commissioner of the DOL, worked in a hotel for 12 years. When you start to build these relationships, like you start to realize these people might have had a background in your industry, and then you start to explain, like, I'm trying to think of, we have a rep in Manchester that was a server for 11 years in the House. And he's a great advocate about the tip credit and how it works. We don't even need to do that, but it's about education. And I am worried about FTC. I am worried about, I'm worried about the Attorney General in California, and what he's saying up at the podium. Because as much as we don't live in California, Frank still has businesses there, but I'm worried about the FAST Act and what happened and how that played out. And now you have a $20 minimum wage in California, and how that kind of played out and what the future of that's going to hold. So we have always a lot of work on our hands as an association to keep tabs. And that's why I try not to get you guys in the weeds of what's going on. But when things do come up, that's why I'd say calls like this, or, panic buttons. I need you to reach out to a legislator. We don't just do that all the time. We definitely try to only hit the panic button and ask you guys to get outside of the four walls of your business when it's needed. And it can't just be a once a year, or, hey, guess what? Like, we can't, it's too late at that point. To Frank's point, if we don't have the voice that we need now, luckily we got through a session that could have been a lot uglier. It could have been better. I was going to try to be optimistic and say we should have got some things passed. I still think there's a lot of stuff that they don't treat our industry the level that they need to. And they take advantage of restaurants, to Frank's point. They do the same in Connecticut as what they do in California. And I'm tired of it. And I think we got to be a stronger voice, but I need each of you on this call to encourage others to get involved, and figure out ways to get involved. And that doesn't mean you need to take hours upon hours of your day. The dollars you go and support, it's the perfect example. The dollars you give us to go to a raft dinner, or to come to the golf tournament, or to go to the crazies, those dollars in turn is why I now have a staff of 5, and why we have Nicole and her team, and we've got Brian Duran, and we continue to grow what we do because our voice gets louder. So it's 11:25. I think I answered those questions on the right, Yvette, about what you can and can't do right now with your menus. I hope we don't have to have a DoorDash menu and your own personal delivery menu and your own catering with this level, wedding Doug menu. But then if you want this, you got 30 different, it's insane to think that they would ask us to do that. But there's a lot of other conversations that need to be had. And, I love just listening, Frank and Doug, to you guys, you both talk, to everyone here today, just to kind of give a sense of what you're going through, and what you're seeing out there, because that's the biggest value that the CRA, I think, has, is hopefully the network that we continue to build of each other. Because you guys go through it every day, and when you can talk to a like-minded, business friendly person that's doing it and saying, hey, I tried this, or hey, you should look into this, it goes a long way. So any other comments, Frank, Doug, Nicole? I know you're coming. I think Nicole had to hop off. You both have, or any other questions? I don't know if anyone, I love to hear what Dave's question was. I want to know how the Wilmette Brew House is going. Dave, I hope you had a great weekend. But any other questions the two of you have, or anyone else that wants to put anything in the chat, or if they can unmute themselves?
You know, the one thing I'll end on saying is, like, I'm working with a restaurateur in Fairfield right now, and he talks about how, because of his location, the city, he can't have a covered patio, but he has umbrellas or whatever. But the rain over the past couple of years, when it rains between 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. for any considerable amount of time, his revenues can dip $3,000 to $4,000 in one friggin' day or one shift, just like that, if he loses happy hour and stuff. And it's amazing that the legislators, they just don't look at that. They don't look at the over under of how greatly restaurateurs have to cleverly manipulate each dollar they get, and a voice and all that can kind of help with that. Yeah, just imagine that. They don't think about that. They don't think about how greatly we can be affected by a lot of different things that are absolutely out of our control. The last thing we need is more legislation that's going to hurt us.
Doug?
I would just end by saying to anyone that doesn't utilize the CRA, make sure you do, because if you have a question, you can call up, you can ask Liz or Yvette or even Scott, and they're there to help. And I've certainly utilized the CRA. It goes both ways. You get what you put into it, and they're always there to help you and represent you. And there's things that you might not even think is where you might think is a silly question, and it turns out that it could be saving you a ton of money. So that's my 2 cents. Get involved. Go to the raft dinner. Go to the golf tournament, and definitely go to the Crazies, because it's a lot of fun.
Thank you both. And obviously to my team, like I said, with Yvette, Katie, Liz, and Jennifer that are on this call here, and all the other work that we try to do. Anyone listening in, or there's always ways that we can partner with you and find ways to help, not only on a state level, a federal level, but obviously on a local level. To Frank's point about you're having challenges, we'll try to find some answers, or at least figure out why, maybe you're having challenges. And just trying to move this thing forward. I think we have an incredible hospitality industry in the state. We have so many great restaurateurs and caterers and private event venue business owners. A stat you guys always need to run around with is we lead the country in percentage of independently owned full service restaurants. 97% of our full service restaurants are independently owned. It's an unbelievable stat. It's why we are what we are in Connecticut, why it's phenomenal. But we also need your voice, because we need you guys to help us make your business easier, hopefully save you some money, maybe make you some more money, and move that forward. But I wish you guys all the best this week. If you can make it out to New Canaan next week, we'd love to see you from earlier on with that. And otherwise, hopefully we see you at Lyman Orchards. We'll have a lot of other, hopefully, webinars like this. I want to kind of talk about other topics. If you guys have ideas for topics, you want to bring some other people on to give their expertise. Love this kind of setting. So Frank and Doug, thank you guys for being the guinea pigs and leading this one off for us. And yeah, we'll talk to everybody soon. And thanks for all the support of the Connecticut Restaurant Association. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Scott.